Hey, in this video I want to briefly introduce driver programs and stubs. So we'll start with a driver program, which is a temporary minimalistic program used to design and test a specific function. Typically you want to design and test each function in a separate driver program written specifically for testing purposes. You can also write a loop to test a function repeatedly without having to rerun the program. Once testing is complete, in other words you have a function that passes the test case, and the function is then used in the driver program to test another function, and of course it can then also be used in the intended program. Okay, so what is a stub? Well, a stub is a placeholder convenience function. It is used in the testing of a function when the program requires the use of another function that has not yet been fully developed and tested. Now, typically you only want one function that is not fully tested, right? But let's say it is convenient, necessary to use another function that you may also not have tested at that point, then you'll go and use a stub. So the focus will remain that particular function that you are testing, but the stub just enables you to actually test that function. So stubs often simply return some value or do some output. They are used as placeholders of fully tested functions and should have the expected declaration, so the correct name and arguments, but they typically have an incomplete implementation. So in other words, they may not perform the correct calculations, but they suffice for testing. So stub is eventually replaced by a fully tested function. This may require the use of another stub, which will also eventually be replaced by a fully tested function, right? And this will continue until you have all of your functions written out. You only want to use tested functions and stubs where necessary, with a single untested function in a driver program. So you can have multiple tested functions and maybe multiple stubs as well with a single untested function in a driver program. The goal is to focus development and testing on a single function. Once the function passes the test case, you move on to develop and test the next function. So once that function passes the test case, it is often then used in the testing of another function. The point is to break a task down into smaller, more manageable tasks. So let's say you have a program that you need to write, and you break that down into functions and classes and so on, as we'll learn in module 1 or 2. But the point is to break it down into more manageable subtasks, basically. You don't want to test your program only after you've written the fifth function, for example, right? You want to test as you go along.